out to 150 yards, you've got plenty of energy, flat enough trajectory. They're flat enough that you don't need to think about it. Hey folks, welcome back to Bullets and Brass. We're doing another caliber review kind of comparison, but we're going old school. We're going 30-30 Winchester and 30 WCF. I mean, there's different names for it, but pretty much we just call it the 30-30, right? And there's a lot of history here. This is a very old round for the modern world. Of the rounds that we still use today on a normal basis, it is one of, if not the oldest. It is one of the original smokeless powder transition cartridges, which is why it looks a little funny. When you look at a case, it looks like 3040 Krag, which is the same era. It is a cartridge that they hadn't really figured out smokeless powder yet, but they knew that it wasn't going to work the same as black powder. They knew that the ballistics were going to be different. They knew that, case design needed to update. We're talking 1895. The original rifle it was chambered in was the 1894 Winchester. That's the traditional lever action. And, I mean, it was a brand new rifle and a brand new cartridge. And we're talking a caliber that at the time was revolutionary. I mean, nowadays we think of it as a relatively mild cartridge, low recoil, not terribly fast, not a ton of power, but sufficient for hunting whitetail, particularly hogs, in the normal ranges we hunt in. And remember what they're putting this in. They're putting this into a lever action rifle, so you can't push the pressure too high. This isn't a big bore, heavy recoiling, high pressure rifle. So you're only talking about 42,000 psi. In comparison to 308, that's 62,000 psi. There's a big difference there. Right there tells you everything you need to know about those two calibers and how they're going to compare performance-wise. And we'll get into that in a minute. Interesting fact from the modern world, in comparison to the old one, the second 30, I mean, we all know 30 at the start is the caliber, right? Well, in modern guns, modern calibers, the second number is usually the case size, the length in millimeters of a case. On the 30-30, it's the standard powder charge. That's a carryover from black powder world. Traditionally, you got about 2,300 feet per second with a 150 grain cartridge. If you're doing a modern rifle with modern style ammo, 24, almost 2,500 feet per second. But really, the older cartridges around 23. Now, 308 is more like 2,800 feet per second. And think about the formula for kinetic energy. That's a big difference. Remember, ballistically, the bullets for a 308 are much more aerodynamic than for a 30-30 because you can't hit the primer of the round in front of it in that tube magazine. 308, it's much easier to get a good ballistic coefficient. Now, Hornady introduced the lever revolution. I never could say that word. But they're a ballistic tip round that gives you all the performance of a spear point bullet in something safe for two magazines. Add that new bullet to better metallurgy, I guess, better firearm design in some of the newer rifles, and you can really push that envelope. But you're never going to make it to 308. Between the two, there's no comparison. However, we're going to do that comparison because people understand 308. In the modern world, 308 is a very well-known, understood cartridge in this category. And really, they shouldn't be in the same category. 30-30 is more analogous to a 243. But now you're getting into different bullet sizes, different bullet weights, totally different vibe. Even though, in terms of the niche, that's the same thing. A low recoil, modest but sufficient energy, not an extended range cartridge for whitetail and smaller animals. I mean, it is that they're meant to be equivalent. So before we get into the ballistic tables, one of the things I mentioned was that it worked in lighter rifles, and I should clarify. The rifles it was designed to operate in weigh anywhere from 6 to 6.5, at most 7 pounds. Other rifles of the era, 7, 8, 8.5 pounds to do the same job. Now, some of those rifles might be able to do more, but if you didn't need the more, you were carrying significantly more weight. When you were carrying it all day, that adds up. So we're going to compare some ballistics, and I'll throw these up on the screen as well. 100-yard zero on the 30-30. They did a 200-yard zero on the 308, and it makes sense for both, but I would probably have done a different zero on the 30-30. It illustrates the point either way. At the muzzle, they're both 1.5 inches down, because they both had 1.5 inches height over bore. 1,900 foot-pounds of energy for the 30-30. 2,600 or slightly more for the 308. Massively more at the muzzle. It doesn't get better for the 30-30. So as you work your way out, we're going to just skip straight out to 100 yards. At 100 yards, you're now even. Okay, it's crept up and come back down a little bit. It creeps up, and at 75 yards, you're like a little more than a quarter inch high. So great for hunting. You're still in that ballpark. You don't have to adjust your aim, right? At 100 yards, 1,400 foot-pounds of energy with a 30-30. Still more than sufficient for whitetail. No issues. Hogs. Nice heavy bullet. You're going to get good penetration. It's going to do the job. The 308 is 2 inches high, because remember it's a 200-yard zero. It's 2 inches high, but it's doing over 2,100 foot-pounds of energy. You're still over 700 foot-pounds of energy higher. This is the part where it starts going bad for 30-30, because very rapidly from here, it loses energy. It's losing velocity rapidly. It's losing energy. At 125 yards, we've only gone 25 yards further. We're nearly 1 inch down, and we're down to about 1,200 foot-pounds of energy. 1,300 foot-pounds of energy, just under that. At 150 yards, you're over 2 inches down. Over 2 inches down. And see, now we're leaving that effective point-blank range. Most people consider it 2 inches up, 2 inches down. So you aim exactly where you want, and you're 2 inches higher, you're 2 inches low. It's not worth, maybe you adjust a hair high or a hair low, but you're not changing your sights. You're not worried about holdovers. Aim and shoot. By 200 yards, you're almost 7 inches low, and you're down to 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. The 308 is at zero, because that's where they zeroed it at, and is at 1,700 foot-pounds of energy. When you hit the borderline, minimum for whitetail on the 30-30, the 308 is still well into the, yeah, sure, we're good on even the next thing up. Even if you want to go all the way up to moose or elk, 1,700 foot-pounds of energy is enough. Could it be a little better? Sure, but it's enough. It just goes downhill from here. 250 yards, you're 14 inches down and 840 foot-pounds of energy. And then at 300 yards, you're over 25 inches down and 700 foot-pounds of energy. Meanwhile, the 308 at 300 yards is almost 9 inches down and has 1,300 foot-pounds of energy, a little more. If you do the lever revolution stuff, you're going to get better numbers out of the 30-30. This was core lock, but not drastically. It's not going to change the comparison. What it's going to do is give you an extra 25, 50 yards before your math doesn't work anymore. It's a hunting round. It's not a long distance hunting round. It's really 100, 150 yards is kind of your expected maximum based on energy. That's the key. It's not the holdover. You can figure that out. It's the energy. But if you think about it, out to 150 yards, you've got plenty of energy, flat enough trajectory. They're flat enough that you don't need to think about it. Point and shoot. Point and shoot. All the rainbow trajectory stuff that people talk about with 30-30, compared to modern flat shooting cartridges, okay, yeah, it isn't the greatest trajectory. But inside practical distances for what it's intended for, plenty good. So, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that was interesting for you guys. I'm not going to specifically focus on old cartridges, but we will be doing more of these. They seem to be a popular format, and I think that people are curious about these older rounds and how they compare to newer stuff, and the newer stuff, how it compares to the last generation of stuff. Because there's always new stuff coming out, and there's always the hype and the media stuff. But in practical use, how do they compare? So we'll get into it. Take care, have fun, stay safe. Hope you enjoyed the new background environment. I decided to shoot in a different room. So anyway, bye guys.